Roots Recovered, Reclaiming Our Names, sponsored by Hampton University.
The water has always been an important part of the African culture. When you take the water from the ocean, put it on the body, they thought it was a healing process. It relieves some of the pain and trauma that we have gone through as people. We want people to remember where our ancestors came from.
Honor you. We remember you.
This is a communication with the past, a yearning among African Americans to connect with the origins of who they are.
Mighty ancestors, rise up! Mighty ancestors, rise up! And take your place within us every day.
It absolutely feels like a conversation with the ancestors and with the Creator, and it brings me back each year.
It's emotional.
Yes, very much so.
Speak your name.
Ancestral names, often unknown, stripped away in the identity theft of slavery.
And we have an ancestor who we only know as that African.
That African. No name.
Names are one of the biggest areas of challenge. For instance, we may only know the first name of an enslaved ancestor, or we may find that ancestor with a specific last name right after emancipation, and then we don't find them again.
Thank you for your voice. Mighty ancestors, thank you for your strength.
If you have those enslaved ancestors, as most folks who identify as African Americans whose families have been here for a while, then what we know is that we were not treated as people. We were treated as possessions.
Listed in documents as property, next to the sheep, the hogs, the crop of corn.
What we know that enslaved people were not listed, say, in the census records, and we know the census was done every 10 years beginning in 1790, and so the first census where everyone will be listed is the 1870 census.
These millions of names of the enslaved connect to some 44 million descendants.
We have many, many ancestors, all of us.
So there's a growing thirst to fill the gaps, uncover the hidden secrets, dig up the ancestral roots, figure out who we belong to.
The pursuit of African American genealogy is so, well, it's challenging, but so rewarding.
It was really 1997, after my father's death, when I had to write his obituary. I really realized how little I knew about his background and my family background in general, and that's when I really became very serious about the research.
And now she teaches others.
I'm Renata Yarborough Sanders, and I am a genealogist and genealogy educator.
Finding names of enslaved ancestors takes time-consuming, comprehensive research.
There are a lot of records out there, really.
There are so many records. More and more each day are being put on the internet. Our ancestors are everywhere, and it's just a matter of us knowing how to go and find them. You You can find our ancestors in various parts of estate records, and what we have here is an inventory. I use this slide in one of my talks to show people that they should always read every document from the top to the bottom, from corner to corner. Don't leave anything out. 31 Negroes of the following names, and then it names every single one of those enslaved persons: Abram, Bob, Moses, and so on.
And those are some of the names that are there, 31. So this means this enslaver had at least 31 slaves.
Yes, and this just happens to be the brother of, excuse me, not the brother, the son of my great-grandfather's first owner.
Once research reveals one name, you follow their path to another, but it's tricky.
Lots of people don't realize that formerly enslaved persons could choose whatever surname they wanted after emancipation. And the myth that they took the name of their last owner is sometimes something that causes a stumbling block, because we're finding that only in about 15% of cases did formerly enslaved people take the name of their last owner. They could take the name of their occupation, like carpenter or shoemaker, or of a famous person that they admired, like Lincoln or Washington or Jefferson. You know, that's why you find a lot of black families with those last names. Yes, Douglas. No matter what you find, you have that pride, just being able to know that, especially in the case of our enslaved ancestors, they survived. They survived whatever it was, whatever ordeal they had to go through as being someone's chattel property. And because they survived, we're here today.
He escaped slavery and, you know, went to the Hampton Roads area to join the Navy, then to come back to the same community he was born in to fight. Just showed you how much he wanted freedom for his family.
One man basking in the legacy of his third great-grandfather.
Hi, how are you?
And the unlikely person who's sharing in his glory.
Roots Recovered, Reclaiming Our Names, sponsored by Hampton University.
My name is Ronnie Nelson Sidney II. I was born in Dunsville, Virginia. Currently a social worker, a licensed clinical social worker, also an author, father, professional speaker, husband. This church raised me. We talk about villages, you know, the elders in the church, you know, my parents, my grandmother, great-grandmother, they all attended this church. So for me, just being here, you know, even not even knowing it growing up, it inspired me, it empowered me, it gave me a sense of identity.
There's a name that means power to Ronnie Sidney II, his third great-grandfather.
When my dad told me about Lewis Corbin's story, so now I have a personal connection to history.
In Essex County, Virginia, lived Lewis Corbin, enslaved in the 1800s on the Bellevue Plantation right along Ware's Wharf, owned by Edward Macon Ware. Documents show a long list of enslaved people owned by the Ware family. Their value, a few $1,000s each, some for lesser amounts.
How can I complain when I had ancestors who endured slavery?
The knowledge of one's roots fertilizes future generations to grow and prosper.
He escaped slavery and, you know, went to the Hampton Roads area to join the Navy, then to come back to the same community he was born in to fight. Just showed you how much he wanted freedom for his family. It just made everything that I was going through minimal. you know, because this man did so much.
Pension files rich with information about the past show he served on the USS Ella, a Union Navy steamer used as a picket and patrol vessel of Confederate waterways. Almost 30 years later, Corbin filing a pension claim. I claim pension on account of rheumatism, affecting my legs, especially in my knees. Contracted while serving in the U.S. Navy during the late war.
Names are very important because if not, it's sort of generalized, it's not real. But when you can go to a cemetery or, you know, my grandmother, her last name was Corbin. So, and my uncle's names were Corbin and my aunt. So that name has always been in my memory. But to hear a real name, and I can actually go on a website and type in Lewis Corbin Civil War, and I can get 83 pages of documents, you know, written about him.
Fellow enslaved man Thomas Turner testified on Corbin's behalf. He and I were owned by the same master, Mr. Ware, prior to the late war, and we enlisted on the same day and served together.
Hi, how are you?
How you doing?
Good.
Thank you so much for helping us out today.
You're welcome.
And still here in Essex County, the Ware and Corbin families.
I guess another bit.
Friends.
You can't own property in this little village unless you're a Ware descendant.
Hannah Tiffany Overton, Edward Macon Ware's family.
3 times great-grandfather.
How did you meet? I mean, you have an unusual
Ronnie,
connection.
did we meet in the march?
Yeah, I think we met. Yeah, it was a Black Lives Matter.
The Black Lives Matter march to have the statue in town taken down.
When I met the family who had enslaved Lewis, it was during a period in time that was very politically charged. It was during the Black Lives Matter movement. And the person that I met was trying to correct history. The person that I met saw the wrongs in history and wanted to take a step forward and figure out how we can correct those. So meeting her was a breath of fresh air because there are not many people who look like her who have the same amount of empathy. During that time, trying to get the statues removed came for a lot of pushback. There were a lot of people in the community who felt like we were taking away their history. We were removing their history, and a lot of them had their ancestors' names on the statue. And she had her ancestor's name on the statue also.
It didn't feel right with it located between the General District Court and the Circuit Court, and in its prominent spot in the middle of town.
She fought with me to help remove the monument.
If they saw this, the two of you standing here.
I mean, like I said, talking to my dad, the Ware relatives helped his wife get the pension. They helped her file the paperwork needed for him to get the pension.
There in the pension files, Ware's son, Robert Ware, who fought with Virginia's 9th Cavalry for the Confederates as Corbin fought for the Union, testifies on Corbin's behalf, saying that before the war, Corbin was worth $2,000 in gold, describes him as a perfect athlete, then supports his claims of rheumatism. I remember he had to be hauled about in an ox cart. When Corbin was dropped as a pensioner in 1896, the Ware family stepped up again to get him back on the roll. Significant in a time in which black veterans were often disadvantaged by a pension system undermined by racism and discrimination. And finally, when Corbin died in 1898, after getting a final payment of $12, Ware assisted his widow. A small price to pay compared to the story of how the enslaved at Bellevue saved the Ware home during the war.
They apparently waved a yellow flag to let the federal gunboats know that there was a man dying inside, so not to fire.
And I really want to make sure I stress the importance of family, lineage, and making sure that you use your history to inspire you.
Lewis Corbin, whom Sidney says turned his struggle in slavery into a strength by fighting in the war. Roots, a name, inspiring him to become an author after growing up with a learning disability, leaving a legacy to his kids.
Tell me about this book, Nelson Beats the Odds.
Nelson is my middle name, but Beats the Odds is really for all of those kids who's struggling academically, who have learning disabilities, physical disabilities, those kids who just are behind the 8 ball, those kids that nobody believed in, those kids who are giving up on themselves. You know, I want them to know that y'all not alone, that I experienced that. Kids all over the world. Somebody reached out to me from Australia, you know, and was in special education. And they shared me their story, and it just let me know that inner child that was hurt, you know, growing up. It's that pain, you know. I don't want no kid to experience that. I want every kid to read this book to be empowered, to be inspired, because my story, my struggle, you know, became my strength.
But it's really a way to say that African American people were people, and they had names, they were called something. And so trying as best as we can to restore those names so that people can find their ancestors.
Taking on the challenge to restore 10 million names of the enslaved. And later,
so a lot of people don't realize that my maiden and my married name is Roach. I married Harold Roach.
The genealogical twists and turns in my own family.
Roots Recovered, Reclaiming Our Names, sponsored by Hampton University.
Tufts University history professor Dr. Kendra Field is the chief historian of the historic and ambitious 10 Million Names Project.
American Ancestors is creating an online repository that will contain the documented family history of enslaved Africans and African Americans in the U.S.
As a historian, I come across the names of formerly enslaved people every day in the course of my research. But even for me, I never quite imagined there could be one place where all this information would live together, one database that might be searchable.
A team of scholars, historians, and genealogists working to recover the names of up to 10 million enslaved people of African descent and connecting them with their 44 million descendants.
So all of us have roots. All of us have roots. Our parents, our grandparents, our ancestors. Some of us may not be able to pinpoint our beginnings because of the divisiveness and the terror and this dehumanization of a people. We stand scattered.
We know that people had names. We know that they might have been recorded in different places, or that they might have been changed over time. But it's really a way to say that African American people were people, and they had names, they were called something. And so trying as best as we can to restore those names so that people can find their ancestors.
So here it is today, we come to acknowledge and to lay flower petals in the water to allow our ancestors to know that we think about them. Yes. We remember them.
That's right.
And what they did and what they had to contend with.
A lot of people talk about the 1870 brick wall. So 1870 is the first federal document that will name many of the people who were newly emancipated. Right. So documents that exist before then typically are naming people who were enslaved. And what we like to do is find as many of those record sets as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. So that might be plantation ledgers. It might be, there's actually a few federal censuses in 1850 and 1860 that name enslaved people that are on what are called the slave schedules.
You have registers of the plantation, but you might have registers of the bank or a funding source for the town. You might have records from churches, for instance, where the church itself owned enslaved people or had enslaved people who were somehow integral to the maintenance of the church. You have war records, so military records.
When we find the name, then we do our best to bring it forward. So then we're kind of coming at it from both angles. So we're coming at it from the 1870 side, but then we're pushing through that brick wall from the record from enslavement.
But these are records that I found some time ago, and I just jumped for joy because these are listings of Black folks.
American Ancestors and 10 Million Names won't do it alone.
It was a journey to discover these big, fat ledgers.
They're connecting with the dozens of groups that have also been doing this research for years, including chapters of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. There's a place on the 10 Million Names website for people to contribute their family history.
Good morning. We are in the midst of an invitation to look at our ancestry.
Regularly, they meet and proudly share their precious ancestral discoveries.
My grandfather was in a jazz band with Count Basie and Duke Ellington. He met them in World War I when the government actually enlisted black bands, jazz bands, to be part of the USO.
I am really interested to learn if our ancestral grandfather was slave or free, because he owned so much land. And I'm wondering, I just want to know, how did he get that much land in South Carolina?
You have to be really emotionally prepared for the things that you're going to find when you're researching these records.
For example, you can find painful family clues in runaway slave ads.
And upon his body are several old marks of the whip. These are people trying to find their family members after emancipation. So they've been separated from their family. They know most of the time such intricate details. They know who they were sold to. They know where they were taken. They know their names and their sisters and brothers and aunts and uncles' names, and they're trying to be reunited with them.
I would like to know the whereabouts of my mother. My original name was Frances Fuller, and I lived in Greene County, Georgia.
There is an African proverb that says, if you don't know who you are, you'll answer to anything. So you need to know who you are. You need to know who your relatives are, even the bad stuff.
10 Million Names has the capacity to kind of connect from one to the next. And so when I think about this project, I don't think about something that's brand new, although it is new in the coming together of resources and technology and kind of the collective will to make it happen. I think of this project as really joining a tradition of African American memorialization of our ancestors, and creating kind of a clearinghouse, a space for these multiple projects, countless projects in some cases, to come together into one space.
Follow along closely and see how the genealogical journey can take you on many twists and turns, as we have discovered in my own family.
So a lot of people don't realize that my maiden and my married name is Roach. I married Harold Roach. We were pretty sure that there was no connection.
When it came to DNA, we were right. No match, but there's definitely a connection. Stay tuned.
I discovered that my great-great-grandmother was Ann Harris, who married a man named Nelson Roach, so she became Ann Roach.
Ann Harris and Nelson Roach married on Christmas Day in 1865 in Guilford County, North Carolina.
That she had a son named James Roach, my great-grandfather. And when he got married, some years later, he listed on his marriage certificate his parents. So he listed Ann Roach, and I'm expecting Nelson Roach as his dad.
But his father is listed as Lace Foyer. We later learn his actual name is Lace Foy.
Am I really a Foy?
So that's how I learned Lace Foy is really my great-great-grandfather. So how did Ann Roach meet Lace Foy? The 1870 census may explain it. Remember, 1870 is the first time African Americans are listed by name on the census, 5 years after slavery ended.
There was Ann and Nelson Roach, and next door was a man by the name of Lace Foy. So there it was in black and white, Lace Foy. But we get to that point and I wonder who in the world was his father? Right. And that just kind of speaks to some of the challenges that African Americans have in trying to discover their ancestry.
I'd go through all kinds of documents and I came across that name, Lace Foy, several times.
Like finding a needle in a haystack, Harold runs across a Division of Slaves document in Rockingham County, North Carolina, following the death of a Benjamin Webster in 1860. He enslaved 31 people before he died. And there on the page, under lot number 3, a man named Lace to be given to Webster's son-in-law, Dr. B.F. Foy. Clearly how my great-great-grandfather got the Foy name. He was enslaved, valued at $1,350.
And I think that's how he became Lace Foy.
How did you find that? That's really hard to do. So this is incredible, the amount of work that goes into figuring this out.
I took our findings to the Vice President of Research and Library Services at 10 Million Names, and she's impressed with what we found. Names are hard to pin down, and finding out more about my great-great-grandfather's time while enslaved will be difficult.
We've done projects for individuals where on the 1870 census they're using one surname, by 1880 they're using a different surname, by 1900 they're back to the first surname. So it's just a little bit complicated. So that, runs into, so I can't say for sure what he would have originally gone by.
Lace is listed as a mulatto on the 1870 census, meaning he was biracial. Who's his father? Remember, his original enslaver was Benjamin Webster. I searched my DNA matches on Ancestry, and it takes me to several Websters. One, a third or fourth cousin, whose family traces back right where Lace was enslaved in Rockingham County. And on the cousin's family tree, relatives of Benjamin Webster, evidence that Webster is possibly my third great-grandfather or one of his brothers. But that isn't the most amazing discovery Harold and I made. His family research was leading him to the same areas in North Carolina, Guilford and Rockingham counties.
So we wondered, who is Nelson Roach? What more do we know about Nelson Roach, the man that I thought was my great-great-grandfather?
Who in turn, we find out is related to me.
Is related to him.
He discovered a woman named Sarah Roach, once enslaved on this property in the 1800s in Rockingham County. She is Nelson Roach's mother and Harold's third or fourth great-grandmother. His story is an example of why records from the Freedmen's Bureau can unearth a gold mine of information.
And so the Freedmen's Bureau was a federal agency that existed for about 7 years. And it's interesting, Senator Tim Kaine, during the time he was the governor, we were indexing the Virginia Freedmen's Bureau records. And he called the Freedmen's Bureau the FEMA of its time.
Nelson Roach, on behalf of his mother, in 1867, petitions the Freedmen's Bureau to have 2 indentures for 2 little girls, Laura and Millie, who I believe were 9 and 11 at the time, indentures canceled by a man named Thomas Roach Jr.
The complaint shows the two children belonged to his sister, who was deceased. Nelson wanted the girls given to his mother. The former enslaver, Thomas Roach Jr., claimed the girls were perfectly satisfied, with no complaint of ill treatment.
I guess who evidently was trying to continue to maintain control over these little girls after slavery was ended.
A common practice as former enslavers abused apprenticeship laws to hold on to the value of the labor.
African American parents who had been enslaved between 1865 and 1867 in North Carolina were incredibly vulnerable to the fact that a slave owner could essentially use this law and say, you don't control or, dictate where your child is, I do as their former slave owner.
At first, Nelson's case was dismissed until the girls, Laura and Millie, showed up at the Freedman's Bureau office ragged and dirty and said they were not being taught to read. That's when Nelson succeeded, and the girls, his nieces, were canceled as indentures.
In 1867, in North Carolina, the law changed and that came to an end. And so there's a 2-year period there where it's likely that those nieces were subject and vulnerable to those apprenticeship laws.
It's like pulling on a string that you can never get to the end of.
So there's more research to do. But for now, we've discovered because the descendants of my great-great-grandmother, Ann Harris Roach, kept the Roach name she got from marrying Nelson Roach, Harold's relative, it means even though I'm not biologically related to Harold, my family got the Roach name from his family. Nearly some 200 years later, we happen to meet and marry.
There's that possibility, not only do we know the names of our ancestors, but we could possibly know where they have rested.
The power of being able to find your family name among the first enslaved Africans. And later, happy birthday to you. Passing down the family stories from one generation to the next.
Roots Recovered, Reclaiming Our Names, sponsored by Hampton University.
It is rare when African Americans can trace their roots all the way back to Africa. Genealogy companies allow patrons to submit DNA that can show from what African region they originate.
We learn from our ancestors, those who came over 404 years ago.
God of all people.
Names humanize the enslaved and their descendants.
400 years ago, you were there with our ancestors when they landed as kidnapped enslaved people from Angola.
And nowhere is that more treasured than among the lineage of the first enslaved Africans to step onto the shores of English North America. Right here, present-day Hampton, Virginia.
My heart is in Hampton because two of my ancestors, John Gowen and Margaret Cornish, left the shores of Luganda, Angola in 1619 on board the ship the San Juan Bautista. They were branded in the slave pens. They were placed on the slave ship. They came across the mighty ocean. They were kidnapped at sea by the White Lion and the Treasurer, and they were brought to these very shores at Point Comfort, Hampton.
20 and odd Negroes recorded as arriving on the British ship the White Lion in 1619. The Tucker family today widely recognized as descendants of two of the enslaved on that ship, Anthony and Isabella Tucker.
Those names mean something to you.
It means they were somebody. The power in being able to say, not only Isabel and Anthony, but the first documented African child born here in America, William, their son. All of this is documented. Everybody cannot document their history back to 1619, but we can. And it's not through all of the documentation, but also through oral history that we were able to connect that lineage back to Isabel and Anthony. The power in that I am somebody. They survived. Their descendants survived. That's how I'm here today. If they had survived, I wouldn't be here. My family wouldn't be here. None of us would be here.
What the Tuckers hope to find out one day is whether Anthony and Isabella are buried here in their family cemetery.
There's that possibility. Not only do we know the names of our ancestors, but we could possibly know where they have rested.
One of the things I like to do is just walk by myself. Walk out here, feel the breeze, feel the land, look at the landscape, try to imagine what things were like. In this particular place, we have so much African American history overlapping. I think this view is not that different than Angela would have seen. Where she would have worked is in this area to our left.
Angela, or Angelo, documented as a Negro woman forced over from Angola, Africa, on a ship run by the Portuguese, later commandeered by British ship the Treasurer in 1619. She lived at historic Jamestown, enslaved by Captain William Pierce.
It is likely she's probably between 14 and 22 years of age, because that's the age group that Europeans tended to purchase women.
As a Jamestown public historian, Mark Summers has shifted his focus. His work is not just about understanding the first English settlers, but about understanding the lives of the Africans, even before they were forced here.
Connecting her to the Pierce family connects us with land that we can actually excavate. So she was the only person in the 1619 Africans who worked at Jamestown, who lived at Jamestown, whose name we had that we could even begin this process with. The English tend to anglicize these names. So Maria becomes Mary, Antonio becomes Anthony, Isabella becomes Isabel. But in English, Angela is still Angela.
We found the well for the governor's house.
Archaeologists unearthed clues to how Angela's and the settlers' worlds collide.
It's the quiet spaces in history where we become American, right? And so for Angela to enter into a household, she's changing foodways, she's changing medicine, right? Practices from Africa. We just hit the layer where we're finding artifacts. These guys found that bottle, and so I've seen it, but I haven't put my hands on it.
Wow.
You wanna hand it up?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, over here.
Yes, we have a history of handing off artifacts to this young lady here.
Is that 400 years old?
It's more than that. I suspect that this is a very large jar, similar to what people homebrew in today.
Mm-hmm.
So we call it a carboy, but it's a rather large jar. If we had the ability to find something like this down at the Angela site of that time period, those are things that Angela held. Those are things Angela used. Those are things that Angela changed the foodways.
Her family is lost forever. Her hopes, her dreams are gone. She is taken, she's snatched forever from her home to this place. And think about how important people's identity is to them if your identity is changed and it wasn't your choice to do so. The lack of choice, the lack of control, the external pressures, the violence that has been done to her already before she even got here. These are the things I think we have to remember when we feel the breeze and we feel the ground.
A celebration 101 years in the making and reclaiming our names.
They were more than just a known person. They were actual people.
It gives you an identity. It contains everything about you. It leads you to your destiny.
Roots Recovered, Reclaiming Our Names, sponsored by Hampton University.
The black bricks are in a configuration that's kind of reminiscent of a West African weaving pattern, but it was also a place of community building, right? Because the enslaver typically wasn't going to come and hang out with you while you were cooking and cleaning and all of that. So it was a place where they could come together as a community. They could laugh, they could talk, they could fall in love, they could get angry, they could make fun of the students and the faculty. They were human, they could be human.
Standing 20 feet tall, 16 feet wide, a tribute to the enslaved on the campus of William and Mary.
Part of this institution's genealogy is slavery.
Granite blocks building a journey of reconciliation, more than 200, each representing a person, a story, and a name.
So this becomes a place of reflection. I think about what were their hopes, what were their dreams. Certainly, what did they see day to day, the day-to-day life, what did they experience on this particular place, in this spot.
As these William and Mary Law School students listen and learn, they know their ancestors' labor here hundreds of years ago is why they can walk these grounds today.
Seeing this is kind of like a recognition. Sometimes black students can feel a little invisible on campus, and stuff like this, you know, it addresses it. Like, okay, you're not alone, you know, there are people here before you that built this campus, so don't worry, of course you belong. So Lemon is listed right there on the 1780 list, and it goes to Kate, James, Gerald, there are two of them, Effie, Frankie, Ned.
Engraved in one block is the name Lemon, for whom the Lemon Project is named. It is an endeavor by the university to rectify the horror of exploiting slave labor by building bridges between the campus and African American communities through student support, programs, and research.
This was the first one. This was nice because it gives you everything for everyone. I think looking at the memorialization and all the research that's going into it, it makes me feel very proud.
Lion Tyler has signed this.
I feel very respected into the effort that's being put in. Being able to be part of that is very special.
So they dig in special collections, tax records, census records, death records, faculty minutes, anywhere they can find a name.
These are payroll records.
All to weave together the human relationships the enslaved had with each other and the greater campus community.
This is their occupation.
Lemon was one of 30 of the enslaved brought to the campus to labor in the 1780s, after the university, in debt, sold its Nottoway plantation. He's listed on a medical ledger.
Lemon is appearing from 1799 to about 1814. He passes in 1817. And so again, we've expanded the narrative of his life, again, wanting to learn more about the stories. We don't know what he's experiencing, but we do know that the college purchased a coffin for him.
There is Henry Billups, a bell ringer in the Wren building on campus where the enslaved people lived. He was brought to the school shortly after slavery.
We found, of course, parents. We found his children, also his great-grandchildren who are still in this area.
One piece of information leads to a story. One story leads to a name.
It's beautiful and also devastating because the names aren't complete, you know? They were more than just unknown person. They were actual people. But I think that's a powerful point that they weren't even given that. I believe they were thinking, one day someone's going to say my name. I'm going to be remembered.
You know you don't look a day over 80, right?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. It's up to you all.
Okay.
Some of the most enlightening documented records come through oral history. Harold Dobbins' family absorbs his every word. He's a proud Navy veteran and 101 years old.
I've been in 3 wars, 3 conflicts, and I'm not supposed to be here anyway. God saved me.
God saved him, he says, on the day his ship, the Dorothy Dix, narrowly escaped a bomb during World War II.
Dorothy Dix, yes, Dorothy Dix. But that plane dropped that bomb and missed that ship. How you missed that ship? That big ship. Had to be God.
Someday, the youngest of this group will tell that story.
Happy birthday to you.
I
can't move forward and you can't be all that you can be unless you know where you come from.
As we bridge the gaps and connect the pieces of the African American picture and embrace the legacies of our ancestors, celebrate their treasures of heart and mind, restoring and reclaiming the family names, understanding their power.
What's in the name? A strong, extraordinary combination of letters, a hope of a good change.
When you restore the names of people, you're providing and you're saying that they are actually people, and that kind of brings home the enormity of the slave trade and enslavement in what becomes the United States, that these people were actually people.
The first page of a chapter in the book of life gives a pure character. A name itself carry out the person.
You've got to go to the location where your ancestors live, get in those courthouses, go to the Register of Deeds office, get into those cemeteries, talk to people.
It defines you.
You were trying to discover things that were deliberately kept from people.
If I could even live up to even half of his footprint, that will make me feel like I've done something worthwhile.
It gives you an identity. It contains everything about you. It leads you to your destiny.
My blood and my DNA is in the soil of this rich land. The red soil of Virginia reflects the blood and the DNA of my ancestors and all of your ancestors, our ancestors, because we are the descendants of those first Africans that came here.
They weren't numbers. There's numbers on a ledger, and they weren't just images of how enslavers thought of them. They actually were people.
As a solid rock of trust, endurance of hardships.
Family history can be an incredibly powerful source of for empathy and for the recognition of our essential humanity, one person to the next.
Sometimes we get stuck on the existing pain, the existing traumas that we live through every day, and we can't connect to our ancestors and say they endured.
But at the end, it's your name, the first chapter and the last in the book of your living days. It shall stay and remain as an unremovable stain. What's in the name?